Hello, thank you for attending my talk, and thank you for coming to the ASEE Southeastern Section Annual Conference. This is a traditional presentation wherein I'll be talking about improving engineering student presentation abilities with theater exercises. I'm presenting on behalf of my co-authors, which you see here on the title screen. So let's get started. So as the title would indicate, this talk examines our experiment, really, using theater exercises to improve engineering student presentation abilities. This is rooted in our premise that student presentations too often lack energy and engagement. Even when they get the technical content right, if they've sculpted it correctly for their audience and they've explained it well and used plenty of good descriptions and good images and so forth, that their actual physical delivery, both voice and body, is lacking. It's just not quite there. And so I contacted my co-author, Greg Carlisle, who is a theater teacher, to ask him, how do I deal with this problem? I really want to improve them, and I've tried a few things, but they haven't really worked. And he sent me some, a file with some voice and articulation exercises and warm-ups and things. And then he said, I could come do a workshop with you guys. And so that kind of blossomed the idea. And so that's what we did. And that's what we're going to talk about mainly in this presentation, is what happened with that workshop and what we found and so forth. We also wanted to start on the theoretical side, so to speak, by looking at fear, because it's our contention, and I believe the contention of a lot of people who teach presentations, that fear is one of the limiting factors with people in public speaking. But that's sort of been treated as I don't want to call it a rumor, but it's usually just sort of thrown out without much evidence. So we decided to dig a little bit. And what we found is a survey about fear in the United States by Chapman University in Southern California. And what they found in that survey is that public speaking came in fifth at 9.1% of the top 5 things that people were afraid of. And notice that it's tied with being a victim of a mass or random shooting. And let that sink in a little bit, that the idea of being the victim of a mass or random shooting, one of the most horrific events I think anybody could imagine, is tied with public speaking as a fear. I mean, if that doesn't prove the point in terms of the fear aspect of it, I don't know what else does. That's sort of crazy, but it really does speak to the apprehension that people have about getting up and presenting. I use with my students, I use myself as a testimonial. If you had told me I was going to be a teacher when I was 20 years old, I would have openly laughed in your face. I had no interest in doing it, and one of the main reasons for that is that I equated it with standing up in front of people and talking, and I was terrified of that. Now, I worked through that and became a graduate TA and found out that I really liked it and really wanted to work at it and be better. But I had a big learning curve, much like my students do. So it's well rooted in this fear. So from there, we developed a hypothesis that these theater exercises that we knew about could help students work with their fear. It might be a good way to get them to overcome that apprehension and get on toward being engaging speakers. Important to say, too, that our own theater experience has prompted this idea. This is Greg on the left in a production of Death of a Salesman in Huntsville, Alabama. That's me on the right in a production of a musical called Urinetown in Starkville, Mississippi at the Starkville Community Theater. So Greg and I met as undergraduates doing theater at Mississippi State many years ago. So we have that sort of shared experience. The workshops involved all the students in our technical writing class at Mississippi State University. I now work at the University of Georgia, but at the time I was at Mississippi State. And Mississippi State's College of Engineering has a required technical writing course for all engineering undergrad. Every engineering undergraduate is required to take it. And it's writing, of course, as the name would suggest, but it's also very heavy on oral presentations and verbal communication, also engineering ethics. It covers a lot. So that semester it involved 226 students. divided into 6 time slots and groupings of 40 to 50 each. And right here, I want to pause and say that groups of 40 to 50 each are way too much. That's way too big. But we had such time constraints with everybody's schedule, the amount of time that we had this room to use, that this was really the only way that we could do it, as it turned out. When and if we do it again, we will try to structure it much, much differently. But suffice to say that everybody's schedules just prohibited us doing anything a little more workable. It still worked out fairly well, but obviously smaller groups would be better. Probably half this, if not a third. So the workshops involved 3 phases, the first of which was warm-ups. And I have included a screen cap here showing some of these. And if anybody's ever done theater or been involved with choral singing, you've probably done some version of this. The deep central breathing, saying huh, 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 repeatedly, and making sure that you're doing that from your diaphragm. You literally have your hands over the lower portion of your stomach to feel your stomach moving in and out instead of pushing it out of the throat. Relaxation and phonation, and then resonators. And you can tell right away, looking at this, that it seems pretty silly. You're out beating your chest like a monkey and making these noises to try to achieve a certain effect. And we were upfront with this. This is Greg's quote from his materials. The exercises are often silly because if you are willing to be silly in public, then you go a long way toward fighting the monster of self-consciousness. I think that is a very profound statement. And in my experience, both in theater and in choir and public speaking and working with students, it's true that if you're willing to be that silly in public, it levels the playing field for people. It's a wonderful icebreaker. Once a group of 40 engineering students has beaten their chests like monkeys and made these silly sounds with their throat, you're not too worried about, talking to them about soil mechanics and looking silly, because you've already done it. So that's an important part of it. It truly, truly is. The second phase required students to read poetry selections. So Greg would have them move around the room, and they had handouts, excuse me, with different poetry selections. The one I've chosen here is Walt Whitman's Beat Drums, and they would read that one at a time going around the circle. They were critiqued as the exercise moved around the circle in real time. So they're definitely put on the spot in front of their peers. They get real-time feedback from Greg and whatever comments maybe are made in the circle. Really importantly, they learn from peers and critiques. So if you've got 40 to 50 students and you're moving around the circle, 35 to 45 of those students are watching the first students do it and getting that feedback and going, okay, so I know to avoid that. All right, I'm going to do it this way. He really wants me to emphasize these certain words in this poetry selection. And so they are creating their own or gathering their own feedback in real time like that. And so you could see it by the time they got around to the other end of the circle, they were responding the way that, Greg wanted them to respond, which is pretty cool to see that. And then the third phase required students to say their upcoming presentation's first line. Now, I made a mistake here in that I was supposed to tell all the students, or we were supposed to tell all of our students who were going to participate, be ready with your presentation's first line. I forgot to do that, and I truly forgot. It was not intentional. I just forgot to say it. That actually, to me, turned out to be a blessing, because then students had to think on their feet right then and come up with it and say they had a presentation coming up the next week in our classes, which is why we scheduled it this way. And they had to come up with their presentation's first line. So that watching them grapple with that in real time and sort of turn it into improv, not excusing my mistake, but I think that was valuable. It maybe helped them think on their feet a little bit. They weren't happy about it necessarily, but that is what happened. So for research purposes, we conducted pre- and post-surveys gauging these student perceptions, and I'll go through quickly some of the major findings that we had. The paper goes into much more detail about it. But as we expected, lack of experience is a contributing problem. They haven't given many presentations at this point. The students in that class are all juniors and seniors. So they're drawing on 3 to 4 years plus of college experience in answering these questions. Very encouragingly, Their confidence in their presentation ability rose from 28% pre to 52% post. Obviously, we like to see that. Their confidence in vocal preparation rose from 24% to 63%. So that would suggest, not running with this wildly, but that would suggest that these exercises at least have some effect, at least help their confidence out. Their confidence in body preparation rose from 28% to 53%, while very confident rose from 2% to 10%. So again, in this instance, it seemed to have an effect. It seemed to make them feel more confident in what they were about to do when they presented. And then you can see here all positive trends. Comfortable delivering oral presentations. I know how to prepare. Preparing the voice is important. Preparing the body is important. Lots of good increases. Lots of good increases there. We also had some open-ended comments. 65% of them were positive. Fun and interesting workshop. Gave me more confidence in presenting. I feel I'll be a much more effective presenter now. I think it would be a good idea to bring him back next year for tech writing students. That's Greg Carlisle, my co-author, one of my co-authors. So good. It was very good to see. 19% were negative. Thought he was a good speaker, but I didn't feel like I got very much out of it. The methods seemed too silly to take serious and to actually practice before a presentation. I do not think his presentation had an impact on me. One person importantly said it felt rushed and it was more like a personal attack than constructive criticism. All right, so don't like hearing that. I'm sad, sorry that happened to that person, but in the future that's something we'll make sure that we try and correct for. And then 16% of the open-ended comments were what we would call other. It taught me how to stand in a crowd. He was cool. I just really wasn't into acting like a monkey. So I learned how to not lose my voice at football games. Very interesting. So another thing that we measured were grades, pre and post. Post-workshop presentation grades increased, although as you can see, it's very slight, so we can't put too much weight into this. But again, a positive trend that at least makes us think this is worth doing. It may not be world-changing. It may not, make all the difference in the world for these students, but it'll make them a little bit more confident and maybe, loosen them up, make them more engaged presenters, that sort of thing, which is what we want. Our initial plan at the time was to start offering these workshops college-wide in 2015. We never really did get around to doing that, mainly for scheduling reasons. Those of us who taught that class at Mississippi State would do our own smaller versions of it with our students with some success. I know I myself did it a few times and wasn't really sure it had gone very well. I did it before our first presentation. We do 2 presentations in that class. And before the second presentation, I just decided, well, I didn't feel like that really went that well, so I will probably just not do it. And students were looking at me before we presented, and I said, what? And they said, aren't we going to do those exercises? And I said, do you want to do them? They said, yeah, we do. That helped. So, on their own, they willingly wanted to do it, and I walked them through it, and, it turned out very well. So it is something that we plan on doing long term, both at their program and at my new program here at Georgia, because I think it's a valuable set of exercises for students to do to help get loosened up and get ready to present. So regardless of the positive trends are all encouraging, they're not strong enough that we can say, well, this is just, this is going to change everything, but it's a positive step forward. And so that's what we're going to try to approach it as that going forward. These are my references. And were we in person, or on Zoom, I would be happy to answer any questions for now. I thank you for listening and enjoy the conference.